The story of Hu Yaobang is actually a story of the Communist Party and the development of that regime. But what happened to him was a function of the distortion of Chinese politics over time, starting with Mao, continuing with Deng, and now even more so continuing with Xi Jinping. It's an interesting story and reflects a lot on the state of the current leadership as well, because the system has not changed. The structure has not changed. The ethics of power in China have not changed. And the CCP still should be held accountable for it. This book is actually a prequel to the book that I wrote at Brookings in 2003, which was a study of U.S.-China relations after Tiananmen. And of course, Hu Yaobang played a significant role in the Tiananmen demonstrations because they started on account of his death and funeral. So I included a very short study of Hu Yaobang in that earlier book, but I thought there's something missing here. It's not a complete story. And then as I talked to some officials in Beijing, they said, Hu Yaobang is a very important figure and you should pay more attention to it. His role was basically erased by the Communist Party of China in 1987 and again after 1989. I mean, his name was basically taboo in Chinese media from 1989 to 2005. And I always thought that that was not fair to history and certainly not fair to Hu Yaobang. So I thought, well, let's try to find out what the real story was. And that was what I want people to understand in a larger context, is that Chinese politics is very complex. Many Americans look on Zhongnanhai as a black box. We can't understand what's going on there, and we shouldn't even bother to try because it's too complicated. But it's not too complicated. It just takes some work. So I would like people to understand that Hu Yaobang played an important role in the politics of reform, and that his role should be recognized and acknowledged.
You used the conscience of the party as the title of the book. So in what sense do you consider Hu to be the conscience of the party?
I have been asked that question by others very close to me. When did Hu Yaobang discover his conscience? Because as you know and understand, Hu Yaobang often did things that were against his conscience, that he was regretful of doing. For example, in the 1959 Lushan meeting, Hu Yaobang was forced, because he was a Central Committee member, to raise his hand in support of the purge of Peng Dehuai and the criticism of Peng Dehuai. Hu Yaobang did not agree with that. And the same thing was true in 1968 when he was called to Beijing. They took him out of prison and they called him up to attend a meeting of the 8th Central Committee, at which Liu Shaoqi was castigated, thrown out of the party, and dismissed for life. And Hu Yaobang was at that meeting and he raised his hand in support of the party resolution, and afterward he always regretted it. So he did not always live by his conscience, but he never forgot it. And after he was himself purged and sent down to a labor reform camp in 1969, he was treated very badly. He was treated badly in the Cultural Revolution as well. And I think it affected his attitude toward the party and what the party was trying to accomplish. So when he was finally released from the labor reform camp in 1972, he still did not have a job. So he stayed at home and he read books, smoked cigarettes, thought about what had happened to him, and began to think critically about what the party was doing and what mistakes it had made. I don't think either Zhao or Deng Xiaoping had as profound a sense of what reform should be as Hu Yaobang did. For Deng Xiaoping, it was a matter of changing the goal of the party's work from class struggle and unceasing revolution to improving the four modernizations, to improving the livelihood of the people and of the economy. For Zhao Ziyang, he had some specific ideas that he thought reform needed to be a gradual process. And you'd start with the key reforms like price reform, for example, and maybe political reform. And then you'd kind of work your way up into different levels of reform. Hu Yaobang really had a sense of, we need to start deeper than that. What does reform mean? Reform means changing something. It means changing something that you did wrong. His attitude was not just that the policies were wrong, but the driving force behind those policies was not correct. It was power. It was personal power. And he thought that should not be the primary force driving Chinese politics. And people recognized that. People knew that he was not a typical Shoujiang, that he listened, that he asked questions, and that he wanted to do things that were in their interest, not just in the interest of the party, but in the interest of the people. So he basically always was looking at the Laobaixing and wanted to figure out what are the ways that we can improve their livelihoods as best as possible. And he started out as soon as Mao died. Ye Jianying sent his son, I believe, to meet with Hu Yaobang. And he said, if China is to have a resurgence, what are the things that need to be done? And he thought about it for a day. And he said, we need to, first of all, stop criticizing Deng. Second, we need to reverse all these evil verdicts against people who were purged during the Cultural Revolution. And third, we need to get back to production. We need to get people so they can raise their own food. And so that was his kind of his hallmark of what needs to be done. And not a lot of other leaders in the party accepted that, or were willing to follow Hu Yaobang in trying to move the Chinese system in that direction.
Hu Yaobang and Deng Xiaoping's relationship is very critical during that period. Deng Xiaoping actually supported some of the Hu Yaobang's measures in policies. And Hu Yaobang is also following Deng Xiaoping's reform, right? So can you describe some of the key points in their relationship?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, most people subscribe to the idea that Hu Yaobang was a protege of Deng Xiaoping. Hu Yaobang never accepted that idea. Their relationship went back to 1950 in the Southwest Bureau of the Communist Party of China, Sichuan, Guizhou, Yunnan, and Xikang, as well as Chongqing. Deng Xiaoping and Hu Yaobang played bridge together. They both loved the game. They were both very good at it because you have to concentrate. Yeah. You have to count cards, and you have to know how to play them. And they laughed and smoked and snacked and had drinks and had a good time, but nobody talked about politics. So the relationship when they came back was still kind of formal. When in 1975, when Mao finally brought Deng Xiaoping back and said, "Fix this mess that the Cultural Revolution had become," and Deng, strode in his usual way and took charge, and he accepted Ye Jianying's proposal that Hu Yaobang be one of his principal assistants and put into the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Deng said, okay, let him administer it. But they almost immediately began to disagree with each other because Hu Yaobang just walked right in and said, Chinese Academy of Sciences does science. It doesn't do ideology. It doesn't do vegetables. And he proposed to bring back all these old scientists who were purged. And Deng Xiaoping sort of says, calm down, don't, because Mao was still alive at that point. And they were all afraid that Mao was going to, which he eventually did, sort of put them all back in jail again, which happened in 1976. And Hu Yaobang was out there, and Hu Qiaomu was trying to, what he did was he put a quote from Mao into one of Hu Yaobang's speeches. And Mao eventually said, I didn't say that. And so they threw them all out again. So Deng's tolerance for Hu Yaobang's kind of free thinking was always affected by the fact that he often said, Hu Yaobang often said things that Deng didn't agree with or didn't understand. And so that eventually brought about, I think, the final deterioration of their leadership, of their cooperation. The key to political dynamics in that period of the leadership in the mid-1980s was the relationship between Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yun. It's very complicated, and I try to deal with it in the book because it affected the ability of both Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang to carry out what they thought were their proper duties. Their principal falling out came over the history resolution, which was in 1981. And Deng Xiaoping essentially became very unhappy with Hu Yaobang and said, I don't want you to work on this anymore. I want you to take a vacation so that we can work on this history resolution, which was very complex. And the principal issue was, how do we evaluate Mao? What role do we assign to him? And Hu Yaobang, understood that you had to preserve some role for Mao and for Mao Zedong thought. But he didn't think it needed to be very important. But Deng Xiaoping did. And so they divided on that, and they never agreed about it. So the relationship was already beginning to fracture. And Hu Yaobang was his own man. He made speeches out in the countryside that were reported back to Deng that he didn't like. He had an interview with a Hong Kong journalist in which he said a lot of things that even he regretted later on. And the old guys heard that, and they said, he should not be saying that. He's using this guy whose name was Lu Kang, and he's using that interview to criticize the rest of us. And Hu Yaobang at that point was beginning to be very frustrated with the return of all these old cadre. And these guys were in their 80s. And Hu Yaobang decided at some point, well, we need to get these guys to retire. And he understood that if he can't get Deng Xiaoping and Chen Yun to retire, then the rest of them won't retire either. So he began to push for that to happen. And eventually he kind of crossed the line. And Deng Xiaoping sort of knew that the elders were too angry. And that so after Ye Jianying died in October of 1986, Deng Xiaoping somehow or another, we don't really know how, but he gave the okay for there to be a what was called a party life meeting, at which Hu Yaobang was set up to fall.
I remember who cried after that meeting, right?
And you know what at least some version of the story, and we don't have the official version of the story, but the coup de grace was a criticism by Zhao Ziyang. It was the last one to be delivered in this 6-day meeting.
So what's the relationship between Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang? I mean, are they competitors for power, or they're collaborating in the war?
They didn't collaborate much. I mean, first of all, they had a different relationship with Deng Xiaoping. Zhao Ziyang was appointed by Deng, and Zhao Ziyang was given the responsibility for managing the economy, which he did as head of the party's economic and financial committee, and also as premier. And Chen Yun wasn't altogether happy with that. So he began to kind of nibble at Zhao's reputation. So Zhao was under pressure on his own, never had what he considered to be the proper authority to make decisions about the economy. And he thought that Hu Yaobang was also interfering in economic affairs, which he was to a certain degree. So Zhao wrote a letter in 1984 to Deng and Chen Yun saying, you need to straighten out the leadership situation. We need to set down and make clear what the relationship is going to be between the premier and the general secretary. Otherwise, I won't be able to stand up to Hu Yaobang. Hu Yaobang liked Zhao Ziyang, but they were different. And Zhao Ziyang supported Hu Yaobang on occasion, but for the most part, they didn't have much to do with each other. Those leadership positions are very isolated, and particularly the premier and the general secretary, except for major meetings, you don't have a lot to do with each other. Their relationships are very formalized.
last part of the book is about the fall of Hu Yaobang. He was accused of promoting bourgeois liberalization, right?
Yeah, bourgeois liberalization.
So do you think that's a real reason for his removal, or do you think Hu actually intending to promote Western values like democracy, liberty, and human rights?
I don't think he ever necessarily thought that we need to do a full democratization of our political system, do away with the party, and all the rest of that. He never went down that road because he knew there was too much opposition to it. But did he support talking about it, investigating the issues, allowing people to write philosophical tracts that didn't necessarily square with orthodox Mao Zedong thought? Yes, he did. He didn't think it was appropriate for people to be thrown in jail for their ideological beliefs. And so he rejected the whole line of Mao Zedong thought that said we need to punish these people. They're rightists and we can throw them in jail and it doesn't matter. For Hu Yaobang, that was wrong.
You said Hu Yaobang is a tragic hero. So in what sense his story is a tragedy? And in what sense he is a hero?
You know, the tragic hero is sort of my sense is that there is a Chinese tradition for this. People like Chu Yuan, for example, and you know, people who are noble and sophisticated and desire the best for the people, but they fall out of favor with the emperor or with the political powers that be. And although they don't necessarily call them tragic heroes, that's more a Western philosophical concept. The ideas are similar. And I think Hu Yaobang fits into that category. He was idealistic. A lot of people after his, and I can remember talking to some of my old associates in Beijing when I went there for conferences and so forth. They said, well, he was Tianzhen, he was naive. And I never thought he was naive. He knew what he was doing. And he was trying to do it in a way that minimized the opposition. And he almost got there. And maybe it was Ye Jianying's death, maybe it was Deng Xiaoping's anger at the sixth plenum of the 12th Party Congress. So he was a hero because people admired him even after his death. You know, the students came out, and part of their grief was, we didn't do enough to help this man in 1987. And he was on our side, and we let him down. So his story was a sad one. And you know, he was an honorable man, but will that party allow that kind of leader to arise to the top? That's hard to say.
So as an American, what part of his characteristics you appraise the most?
I liked his candor. I liked his willingness to speak truth to power. He had a kind of quiet moral courage that I think was one of the reasons why Tian Jiyun called him the conscience of Communist Party members, that he was willing to speak. And if people can have a better understanding of that, because right now, I mean, Hu Yaobang has again been silenced by the party. You know, his website's been closed down. You can't find any reference to him in the current party literature. So I would like, you know, for people to understand that there was a Hu Yaobang and he mattered. That he was a decent man in a system that didn't always welcome decency. That he stood up for the Chinese people and they remembered and respected him for it.